Hey, what's up guys, it's James Diamond here and welcome back to the next episode here on Sonic Academy of my series How to Make Uplifting Trance. In the last couple of episodes we looked at processing and creating the Psytrance kick and sub bass line, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the more traditional uplifting trance rolling bass line, the mid bass that is. I must say before we get into it that this series is more to do with the actual mixing down process, showing you the techniques to help you to kind of move from the beginner, intermediate to the more advanced side of things. I want to show you how I mix down, which different plugins I use. It's not about creating sounds from scratch and showing you the synthesis part of the project. So I won't be showing you exactly how I've created all of these different sounds, because that would take many more hours and the course would be far too long and it could be a completely different series. So please bear that in mind, that this is really going to be more about mixing down process, and also on top of that, that the creative process is also something that's not really going to be in this series, as that's something that comes from yourself. That creativity is something that I can't teach you how to be creative. I can't teach you how to make melodies or how to kind of do interesting and weird things with audio samples and stuff like that, as that's really down to the person yourself. This is all about mixing down and getting that nice clean sound. So out of the way, let's have a look at what we're going to be doing. I've got my three bass lines here and I've linked them all up to the individual channels. So let's just have a quick listen to these. Some pretty standard kind of trancey sort of mid bass lines. So let's go in and add some MIDI into them. Maybe knock that down an octave. So that's sounding quite nice. Let's have a look at some EQ. And let's just cut off some of the low end. And increase some of the mid and the high. That's pretty much the extent of the process that I'm going to do on the mixer channel, as we'll continue to do some more processing later on. So let's just copy this bass line down to the next one. Let's maybe drop that down an octave. And let's add on our next EQ. Quite a lot of low end in this one, so we need to cut some of this off. A lot of low end on that, and as you can hear, even though I've got this all the way cut up to 894 Hertz, it's not necessarily going to mean that you're going to be cutting off all of the low end. It's quite something that is overlooked when you're a bit of a beginner intermediate producer, that you might not know that EQs don't cut 100% of the sound. Have a look online and try and search in for the kind of parameters of an EQ and how high cuts and low cuts work, and you'll find out that it does take a couple of EQs to actually cut some of the sound. There is a kind of formula to the way it needs to be cut. I'll let you find out for yourself, but I will tell you that a single EQ won't always cut 100% of the sound. So rather than add an extra EQ, I'm just going to use the built-in one here and just cut some more of it out. Some low and some mid-low and some high boosts as well. So let's copy this MIDI down to the final bass line. Knock it back up an octave. And I'm going to just kind of change around this MIDI to make it a little bit different to the first two. It's something I like to do on a lot of my tracks. Instead of having it the same, I'm just going to move it one notch to the left. So it's kind of counteracting, it's doing a kind of counter bass line to the first two. And then I'm going to fill in the missing notes. Quite a lot of low end on this one, so let's again cut it out. And once again, a little bit more low, mid, and high boosting. Kind of the same process throughout all of them. Let's go into the actual sound itself. Sounds quite nice, made it a little bit more metallic. So let's try and EQ, let's just kind of get these volumes right, and then maybe a little bit of EQ with the kick and the sub. So that's sounding quite nice at the moment, although it's very kind of straight, not much kind of groove to it. So I've linked these all to our bass bus, which is going to be where I'm going to be controlling some more kind of processing. So if you don't know how to link something to a bus or an auxiliary bus in FL Studio, it would start with your little kind of controller here. This shows you where the output of the channel is going to. So bass 1 is being linked to the master output. All you need to do is right click to the channel you want to send it to and click route to this track only. Or you can simply toggle them on and off like this. So we've got our bass bus set up, and this is the processing we're going to be looking at. First of all, I'm going to go into LFO tool and use this as our sidechain to create the pumping effect. So let's turn that on. LFO tool is an absolutely great tool. I use this for my sidechain rather than using an actual kind of compressor, which is being triggered by a muted kick drum or some other kind of single hit. Because it's much easier, I don't have to set anything up, and it's got presets built in, and it also even loads up as a kind of sidechain compressor or ducking straight away. If it doesn't load up like this, you can simply go to presets, go to sidechain 1, and this is the preset here. We're just going to move this dot just a little bit to the left because sometimes it can cause some clipping when the sidechain, when it's at default, the sidechain will go straight back down to to the default position down here, and it can cause some clipping. So we're just allowing the ducking to kind of go back down to its original position to avoid any clipping. So let's have a listen. I'll see how that sounds now. So that's now added a bit more kind of groove to it. It's reduced the volume a little bit, so maybe let's just pull these up one by one. I'm liking the sound of this third bass line, but maybe we should add another LFO tool with a bit more sidechain just to make it a little bit more groovy, as it's kind of taken over the mix a little bit. So that sounded quite nice, pulling down on the mix of the LFO tool just so it kind of reduces the amount of sidechain. Next up, let's add some delay into the mid bass lines. So I've got the bass bus, and this is a sends delay setup here on the right on the first send channel. And all it is, this is just the default setting. It's just a Fruity Delay 2. I want to change this to wet, so I'm going to pull dry all the way down. Let's change the panning to the left a little bit. We've got it on ping pong mode. Pull the offset to the right a little bit more. Let's have a listen to this. Sounds quite nice, but there's quite a lot of low end on this delay that we don't really want. It's kind of clashing with the kick and the sub a little bit. So then let's get this EQ after the delay, and we're just going to do a low cut on it once again. So that sounds a bit better, a lot more kind of cleans up the low end a little bit, stops the low end of the bass kind of messing up with the kick and the sub. So now that we've got them kind of basic EQ, we're going to go onto our bass bus and start processing it a little bit further. So we're going to be looking at using the Vertigo VSC2 again. If you can tell, this is obviously one of my favorite compressors, and we've used it quite a few times in the mix now. You don't necessarily have to use these, but as I've mentioned before, my style of mixing down is using these kind of software versions of their analog counterparts. So I'm going to do a relatively quick release time, 0.3 seconds, just to make sure that it kind of adds a bit of pump to the sound. And let's pull back on the attack. We don't need it too slow, about 1 millisecond, and a ratio of 2 to 1 should do, as we just want a bit of slight soft compression. It's a very minimal kind of sounds kind of change that's going on there. But it's basically, you could hear it's adding a little bit more pump to the sound as the compressor was jumping up and down. We were compressing by about 2 decibels. And what this is also going to do, when further on the track, when the mid bass lines are changing key, sometimes when you change key from the standard one that you set it at, it can the volume can jump up and down. There can be peaks in the sound because the synth might not be playing the exact same notes every single time, so there could be little peaks that you might want to just control, and by compressing by a couple of dB will help kind of maintain a kind of standard volume across your whole track. Next up is we're going to kind of beef up this sound a little bit, and we're going to use the Fruity Blood Overdrive. This is a great little plugin for adding just some kind of grit to your sound, and it's got this great toggle here which is called color, which can kind of, it's almost like a resonance frequency where, or a band where it will sweep up and down, and the higher you go, the more high it adds in, the lower you go, the more kind of it affects the low to mid. The preamp is what you do to push the sound through the plugin. So that's sounding pretty nice. It's really added a bit more kind of grip to the sound. It's actually cleaned it up a little bit, added the distortion, added a bit more kind of body to the sound itself. A nice little technique there. There is a little bit more low end on the sound, so I might just cut that out. Couple of rogue bottom end frequencies there, as even though we've cut them out of our actual mixer channels itself, if you think about it, say we've cut by you know, for example 2 dB on every single channel, that's then 6 dB kind of cut away, but there's still going to be some extra low ends that hasn't actually been cut, so we just need to cut it once again on the bass bus just to clean it up that little bit extra. Next up, to kind of improve the sound a little bit more, we're just going to add some more EQ, and we're going to be using the Waves API 560. Again, this is kind of based on a analog EQ, much like the Mag EQ4. Absolutely fantastic plugin, this one, and it's got your bands already kind of set there for you. So I'm just going to play around with these and just kind of brighten it up and add a little bit more warmth and body to the sound. So that's sounding pretty nice. It's really just kind of cleaned up that high end and really helping it come through. So as you can see, I've only really done minimal kind of processing on the actual mixer channels itself, with some cuts and some small cuts and some small boosts. And it's on the bass bus that I'm really kind of adding these extra bits of processing. And hopefully you can see that it's each individual one is doing a little bit at a time, just to avoid the stress of, you know, for example, boosting, you know, 9 dB or whatever, or 8 dB on a single EQ. We're kind of boosting by, say, 4 dB over 2 EQs, just to relieve the stress on the actual EQ itself. So rather than using the API, we could have a look at using the Mag as well, and potentially we could have a look at using the Airband again. It's also got a really nice kind of high-end boost on it there. Airband didn't really work so much in the 40 Hz, as there's not really much frequencies up there in the bass, but the 10 kilohertz worked a little bit better. For the time being, let's use the API, but I'll leave this Mag EQ4 in the project if you want to use it yourself. So that's pretty much it for the mid-bass line. As I said before, it's lots of different processing, minimal amounts, but over a long processing chain will give you that very nice, clean kind of sound without the sounds being distorted by adding too much EQ on a single EQ or compressor. So hopefully I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.